Well, I was inspired for the offering tonight. 2 weeks ago, many of us participated in as a community with really thousands of others in the National Buddhist Memorial for Asian American Ancestors. The title of it was May We Gather. And it was an incredibly moving evening of ritual and devotion. And so I thought I'd pick up on that. And then, of course, last week, Chenzing Hong challenged us to even a deeper respect for um, our Asian Buddhist forebears and mentors and sisters and brothers, who are by far the majority of those considered to be American Buddhists. So even more about refuge. Chenzing Han's book is titled Be the Refuge. So in both, there were strong themes of refuge and devotion. And so I thought we'd continue to explore together the themes of refuge with an aim to deepen a bit our daily practice of the teachings, just in the ordinary challenges of our everyday lives and relationship. So before we even begin, I wanted to bring awareness to the third refuge, the refuge of the Sangha. And again, inspired by the ritual of a couple weeks ago, I thought, I wanted to light a candle. In honor of the noble Sangha of enlightened beings and teachers who have gone before us and who have protected the teachings for centuries, first in Asia, and then, as we remembered together last week, the Asian American ancestors who long ago brought the teachings with them to the West. So really, let this candle be a recognition of the lineage that we share. I'll put it back over here. And so that's sort of referencing what's known as the noble Sangha. And then there's the ordinary Sangha. And that's all of us here together. First off, I'm just wondering, is there anyone who's here for the first time tonight? Anyone that I'm not recognizing as a new person? So all of us have been here before at one time or another. I'd invite you to just look around, to maybe just do what I just did, scroll through the pages. And just pause for a moment at each little square. You know, we kind of bow to each other. This is our Sangha. This is our community. These are us who practice together, inquire together, investigate together, stumble together, forgive each other together, do all that a Sangha does. So here we are. And then you might just take a quick look outside if you're near the outside, and just see the land that we're on. It's pretty beautiful right now. The light is so pretty, and we can remember as we look at this land that this land was walked. This land, the land that I'm sitting on right now, was walked by our Monacan ancestors who centuries ago were the inhabitants of this property and who continue to teach us how to live and be grounded on land. So really a deep sense of community. maybe we'll just take a moment too as we begin. If anybody feels so moved to either speak, unmute yourself, and or write in the chat box just how you are tonight. One word. If anybody feels so inclined, and if you don't feel so inclined, don't do it. Anybody? Settled? At ease? Mellow, grateful, grateful. Relaxed.
Quiet.
Quiet. Meh. Thank you for including that dimension. Because not all of us are feeling relaxed and grateful at all times. So, just let yourself feel whatever. And we'll start a meditation. At the very end of the meditation, I will temporarily mute myself, and then I will play a chant, a part of a chant. At the end of the May We Gather ceremony, the Buddhist monks chanted the Ratana Sutta. And the very end of the Ratana Sutta is a form of taking refuge. And I will play the last three verses of that sutta as a chant. And it will be all in Pali, and you won't know the words. So I'm going to invite you, as you listen to it, to feel it. Don't worry about what the words are. We'll explore the words a little bit later. And the person who's chanting, many of you know, Amma Tanasanti. So she will be the, I guess, chantress or something like that. So that will be the end. And I'll try to remember to just note that that's coming so I don't surprise you with all of a sudden a chant coming out of the clouds. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and start. Look at this. I even remembered my bell tonight. Very exciting. Taking a moment as we begin to simply notice, perhaps even a little more deeply, how it is to be here. If it's meh, or contented, or anxious, or tired, or grateful. To let yourself notice how that is. How is it in the body? How is it in the mind? And then to let awareness touch into this ground again that is holding you. You can feel the ground through the maybe through the feet, through the buttocks, really touching into the places that this body, whatever it is, however it is, makes contact with this ground. You don't have to do anything for the ground to hold you. The gravity just does. It's receiving you, hanging on to you, um, there for you. And we're invited to simply relax into that ground that can know and be aware of whatever the other experiences are, whatever the thoughts are, whatever the state of the mind is, whatever the state of the body is, whatever the state of the emotions are. It's like this now, known and held in kind awareness. You might like to start the meditation by taking a little bit deeper than usual breath. Um, and holding it for maybe a count of 3 or 4. And then slowly releasing it for a count of 3 or 4. Just another way of helping the body to settle in. And maybe another deep breath, just like that one. Deep breath, maybe to a count of 3 or 4, holding it for a count of 3 or 4, and releasing it. And one more. And now letting the breath be natural in whatever rhythm is natural for it tonight. Just simply resting awareness with this body breathing. It's like this now. This body, this breath. In just a moment, I'll offer the closing chanting. And so you might, as you prepare for that, simply rest in the emptiness of the quiet of waiting. Again, the chanting will be in Pali. Don't worry about the words. See if you can allow the sound to simply be received, just hearing sound.
Yani Rabutani Samangatani Umani Vayani Vayatariki Tatagetam Deva Manu Sapujita Buddha Namasamasu Atiyutu Yani Dabutani Samangatani Umani Vayani Vayatariki Tatagetam Deva Manu Sapujita Dhamma Namasamasu Atiyutu Yani Dabutani Samangatani Mumani Vayani Vayatariki Tatagetam Deva Manu Sapujita Sangha Namasamasu Atiyutu
Good. Again, that was the same chant that the monks chanted at the end of the May We Gather. And so we end our meditation. In the same way. And so, actually, I've asked, Susan is someone who in our community often will chant at the beginning of the teaching. And I've asked Susan to do that tonight for us. So if you will, Susan, if you'll do the refuges that are typically chanted at the beginning of a teaching. And I will put it in the box. Susan's going to chant them in Pali, and I will put in the box both the Pali and the English, but Susan will not chant them in English. She'll just do them in Pali.
Good.
Thank you, dear. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Sharon. So let me ask you, now that we've had this conversation about audio level, how is the audio level? I don't want to blast you out if I'm chanting or be so silent you can't hear me. Sound okay?
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, we can lower it on our own.
Okay, you can
if
this
we
or
need
this.
to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
All right.
at least loud enough. It might be a touch too loud, but better that than too soft. So good.
Okay. Thank you. So Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Thank you, Susan. So I'd like to explore refuge a bit tonight. Susan just chanted the taking of refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And again, I just think it was one of the aspects, this chanting and devotional aspect was one of the aspects of that May We Gather ceremony that touched so many of us so deeply. And we thought about incorporating it a little bit more into some of our offerings here at IMCC. You know, though, it might be easy and maybe even nourishing enough. I mean, we can listen to the music and the sound and find it nourishing. It might be easy and nourishing enough for us to say, well, that's what's nice. We should do it more, but we also run the risk, if you will, of taking on a form that could seem cool or exotic without actually embodying the practice or the practices or the teachings in a practical and meaningful way in our real lives. So I thought about exploring both the devotional aspects of it and the practical aspects of refuge. The Ratana Sutta, that the one that Amma chanted, the occasion for that sutta, for the Buddha giving that teaching, was that the city of Vesali was afflicted by a famine, causing death, especially to poor people. That sounds familiar. And due to the presence of decaying corpses, it is said, the evil spirits began to haunt the city. And it was followed by a pestilence. And then plagued by 3 years of famine, non-human spirits and pestilence, the citizens asked the Buddha for help. And he came to the city, and on his arrival, there was a torrential rain which swept away the corpses, and the atmosphere became purified. And then the Buddha delivered the Ratana Sutta as a mark of protection and refuge for the citizens. So that sutta that was chanted at the end of May We Gather and that Amma is chanting is a mark of protection and refuge. Refuge, refuge, refuge. In the midst of illness, conflict, division, fear, meh, refuge. So I want to take a minute right at the beginning here and just ask you about the word refuge. Could you reflect on that for just a minute? What does refuge mean to you? And if you want to put it in the chat box or you want to say it out loud, take a moment though, just reflect. What refuge, refuge? What does refuge mean to you? Protected, safety, relief, sanctuary, soft place to fall, escape, support, comfort, rest. Security, home, safe direction, peace, where something precious can hide. Safety, belonging. Ease, withdrawal. Escape. Yeah, all of those. Refuge, safety, home, withdrawal, shelter. The Buddha teaches refuges, refuges. Um, everyone takes refuge in something. And the Buddha taught those teachings when there was some difficulty. He said, here's, to take refuge. So take a moment also, and you don't have to post this, just contemplate it. Consider some difficulty in your life. You may not have decaying corpses in your yard, but there may be a difficulty. It could be big. Could be big, could be little, could be tiny, but something that sort of is a bit of a difficulty for you. Could be out in the world, could be politics, could be, that you haven't done the dishes yet. So just contemplate. That invite us to work with this a little bit practically as we go through the evening. How do Buddha, how do Dhamma, how do Sangha offer refuge with this? Maybe relationship difficulty, maybe, don't know. And the Buddha, as you know, pointed out the unreliability of most of the things that we take refuge in. The things that we go to for comfort. We go to food or alcohol or TV or sleep or shopping or a vacation or a chance to have lunch outside or go to a restaurant or whatever it is. And the Buddha pointed to, not that those things are bad, that can be misunderstood. Not that those things are bad, but that they're so limited, that they're unreliable. They're not under our control, and they don't last. So most of the things that we ordinarily take refuge in aren't really those places, as you've noticed, I'm going to go back to your words, ease, escape, withdrawal, belonging, safety, precious, where something can hide. Most of the things that we typically take refuge in don't really reliably offer us that kind of safety. And Mingyur Rinpoche says, if we rely on permanence where none exists, and if we rely on control where none exists, then our feelings of betrayal and anger compound our suffering. If we rely, let's say, on a person to be our refuge, when that inevitably fails in some way, big or small, then the sense of betrayal and anger can compound the loss. So the unreliability of refuge. So the Buddha invites us in our practice to take refuge in what is more reliable, in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. There's a really important point that Ajahn Suchito makes. He says the Buddha advised the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in order to give rise to gladness and confidence. So our practice of refuge isn't some kind of thing that we're trying to twist ourselves into, but to touch into the space of gladness and confidence. Gladness and confidence. And Ajahn Suchito goes on to note that sometimes though we recollect the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in the backs of our minds, or more accurately, maybe even unconsciously beneath our conscious thought, we actually hold back from finding real or nourishing refuge. And these are some of the things that he says. I've added to them a little bit, but he talks about refuge in the Buddha, excuse me. Refuge in the Buddha to us sometimes means refuge in somebody who lived a very long time ago in a completely different culture, who is a whole lot better than I am, and who achieved something that actually has absolutely nothing to do with me. And furthermore, it's impossible. So we can kind of think of refuge in the Buddha in that kind of abstract, distant, impossible way. Refuge in the Dhamma, it equals something that I don't really understand very well at all. And anyway, I haven't gotten very far with it. And anyway, when things get really tough, I forget all about it and watch more TV or complain more or criticize myself more or sleep more or drink more wine. And so I'm really not very good at that either. And then refuge in the Sangha equals a bunch of people who belong to something, who are far more advanced than me, who are somehow comfortably all connected to each other, and who form a group that I'm not really an important part of. You might notice some familiarity in some of those thoughts. That sometimes when we consider the teachings, they can just seem so far away. That they really aren't, as Ajahn Suchita says, a source of gladness and confidence. They're more a source of, oh, I failed again. There's no security here because, I'm not really very good at this. Mingyur Rinpoche tells about a Tibetan teacher who discouraged his Western students from taking robes, from ordaining, because he said the tendency of his Western students was to take refuge in the robes and the, and the form, and not really in the refuge, in the gladness and safety of the teachings. And so again, we can sort of think, well, I'm not a very good meditator and I should be taking refuge in my meditation, and it's not really very good. And, so therefore I failed again. And that isn't quite what the Buddha was talking about. He advised the recollection of Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha in order to give rise to gladness and confidence. And so the invitation of all of our refuge practice is to touch into the heart sense of these refuges. And I think that's really what touched so many of us about the ceremony a couple of weeks ago, is that in some mysterious, grace-filled, maybe ineffable way, it really touched our hearts in gladness and confidence. So how do we do that? And part of the practice, part of the way to do it, is through real devotion, really letting ourselves just drop into, I know Liz has talked about this, drop into the devotion and non-conceptual of the refuge practice itself, of the refuges itself. He says, Mingyur says, without devotion, we're like cups turned upside down, unable to take in anything. And the main point of the entire practice, are you ready? The main point of the entire practice is to recognize our own awareness, and to do what it takes to nurture it. We're not trying to put something into ourselves. The main point of our refuge practice is to recognize our own awareness and to nurture it. So, refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the three refuges. We may not get through all of them, but you'll get the drift of it, so not to worry if we don't. So, refuge in the Buddha. In one way, refuge in the Buddha means refuge in the Buddha as the one who knows, indeed, the personification of ultimate wisdom. Unpersonified wisdom without some thinking of it as some person. It's kind of abstract for us. We can't quite get our minds around it. And so we think of the Buddha as this personification of wisdom. So we use the Buddha as a symbol. Let that one land. We use the Buddha, we use refuge in the Buddha as a symbol, not taking refuge in some historical prophet, but in that which is wise and loving and compassionate in the universe. That which is not separate from our own being. But it's more real than anything we can conceive with the mind or even experience through our senses, even by looking at, beautiful nature or whatever. We call it Buddha wisdom. Other people call it different words. They call it basic goodness, the ground of being. Lots of different words for it. But we're using the term Buddha wisdom as just a symbol to help remind us to be tuned into our own wisdom, to our own alertness, to our own awakeness. When there's wisdom, when we act wisely and we live wisely, we are truly safe. We don't avoid mistakes. We're human. We don't avoid mistakes. But we have the presence of mind to reflect on and learn from life as we are living it, knowing the nature of conditions of impermanence and change and causes and conditions, humbly submitting to that wisdom. And we tend to forget. We habitually take refuge in things that are unreliable, or in things like worry or doubt or fear or anger, greed, thoughts, views, opinions, loves, hates, whatever. Our own self-conceit, our own pride. So we forget, we kind of turn sideways. We take the teaching and we turn it sideways into a thing that we're supposed to do rather than a practice of simply touching into and receiving the tuning, if you will, like a tuning, like a tuning into our own deeper wisdom and deeper knowing, where there is just gladness and confidence. And where there is the one who knows what is wise. Deep within us. So I'm going to play the first part, if I can remember to do it properly. I'm going to play the first part of Amma's chant again, just the refuge in the Buddha. And I will, I'll post the words. Will I do that? No. I'm going to ask you to just listen to it. I'll post the words when it's finished. But we'll just do the first part. And I'm just going to invite you to contemplate as you listen to Amma singing a blessing, a refuge in the Buddha. Look to see what is it touching in you. And if you can't, quote, figure it out, don't worry about it. Just notice whether or not it's touching anything, and whether or not there is indeed any gladness and confidence. Okay? So before I do that, any questions about that? Does that make sense, what I'm going to ask you to do? Okay? So we're just listening again, and noticing what it is touching.
Yani Rabutani Samangatani Umani Vayani Vayatariki Tatagetam Deva Manu Sabujita Buddha Namasamasu Atiotu.
Whatever beings are here assembled, whether terrestrial or celestial, we salute the perfected Buddha, revered by gods and men. May there be well-being. So we're saluting not only the historical embodiment of wisdom, but that place in you that is touched. Okay. As I suspected, I'm not going to get through the whole thing, but you'll get the drift of it. And I do want to end with listening to it one more time. So like similarly with refuge in the Dhamma, it's not refuge in some philosophy or intellectual concept in theories or ideas or doctrines. It's not something separate that we have to find later, but becoming wise, we take refuge in the tools, the teachings that enable us to transform obstacles into opportunities. And notice too that when we meet someone who is wise, and indeed when we recognize our own wisdom, that it has a flavor to it. The Buddha says Dhamma is sanditiko, imminent, here and now. Akaliko, timeless, not bound by any time. The wisdom is not bound by any time or condition. Our conceptual mind can't conceive of it because our conceptions and perceptions are time-based. Opanaiko, leading inwards and toward peace. And pachatam veditabo vinui, only known through direct experience, like the taste of honey. So wisdom, the deepest wisdom, and I think that's really kind of what you're all referring to, is that deepest wisdom is only known through direct experience, like the taste of honey. And so when we struggle with an obstacle, then we might invite ourselves to look to the Dhamma and say, what can I learn here? How this is an obstacle. This is a cloud that's covering over the deepest sense of wisdom in my own being, the deepest sense of confidence and gladness in my own being. What about the Dhamma could I practice here that could help guide me toward remembering that wisdom? Can we rest in refuge in the Buddha's teachings as like, it's sort of like, I'm lost and, oh, right, I have that map. Remember maps? In my glove compartment, or I have a GPS. I can just plug that in and it will tell me something useful. I still have to do it. I still have to inquire. I still have to deal with all the detours and the roadblocks and all that stuff. But I have a teaching that the Buddha offers as a guide, not to some external place out there someplace, but to the deepest wisdom that is fundamentally a part of my own being. And then the Sangha, just very quickly, there are two kinds. The Sangha refers to two different things. One is the noble Sangha, which refers to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Arahats and other sages who have attained enlightenment and hold the lineage. So we take refuge in the fact that there really are a lot of beings who have attained complete enlightenment. But the ordinary Sangha is just, look around. We did it at the beginning. Here's our ordinary Sangha, folks. Here's all the friends who are on the path together, who, when I get caught, you help me find my way. You remind me of who I am and of what the teachings are. When I make a mistake, you correct me. This is the Sangha. Here we are together, helping, guiding each other. Sometimes we can think of, Buddha's refuge in Buddha, that's kind of a big deal. Refuge in Dhamma, that's kind of a big deal. Refuge in Sangha, you just have to kind of put up with one another. But actually, I remember Ajahn Chah used to say that he could go off into the forest and attain great states of accomplishment and enlightenment. But he deliberately came back to the monastic community because he said that's where his learning was. So the Sangha. So again, the devotion is important because it helps us move past that conceptual mind. Mingyur, again, I read it to you at the beginning. Without devotion, we are like cups turned upside down, unable to take in anything. The main point of the entire practice is to recognize, he says, our own awareness and to nourish it. Um, so, may the light of your own goodness and wisdom be nourished, and may you go forth in goodness and gladness. Thank you.